It is July 14th, 1518, a Sunday. The sun sits high over the free imperial city of Strasbourg, pressing down on the narrow cobblestone streets like a hand on a chest. The air between the half-timbered houses does not move. It smells of tanneries and horse dung and the slow, green current of the Ill River. A woman steps out of her home. Her name is Frau Trophäa. That is nearly all we know of her. She is poor, she is married, she lives in one of the cramped lower districts of a city that has been starving for 3 years. And on this Sunday morning, without music, without warning, without any reason that anyone standing in that street can name, she begins to dance. Not a jig, not a waltz. Her body jerks and twists, her arms flail, her feet slap the cobblestones in a rhythm that belongs to nothing. Her husband begs her to stop. She does not stop. She cannot stop. Her eyes are glassy and distant, locked somewhere no one else can reach. She dances through the afternoon. She dances through the evening. She dances until the sky goes black and she collapses in a heap on the street. And then, before dawn, she rises and she begins again. She will dance for 4 to 6 days before the city authorities finally load her thrashing body into a wagon. By then, her feet are blistered and bleeding, her leather shoes soaked through with blood. They cart her 30 miles to a mountaintop shrine, hoping God will do what her own will cannot. But the thing she started does not leave with her. Within a week, 34 more people are dancing. Within a month, the number reaches 400, and some of them will dance until they die. This is the story of the dancing plague of Strasbourg. And the horror is not the dancing. The horror is what made it necessary. I'm A.M. Blackmere, and this is the Blackmere Podcast, where true history is told like a horror story. There is a specific kind of terror that comes from losing control of your own body. Not illness exactly, not injury, something closer to betrayal. The moment when the thing that carries you through the world stops obeying your instructions and begins to follow its own. That is what happened in Strasbourg in the summer of 1518. Hundreds of people, mostly poor, mostly desperate, began to move involuntarily in the streets of their own city. They did not choose to dance. They wept, they screamed, they begged to be stopped. Their feet bled through their shoes, and still they could not sit down. The city's physicians diagnosed them with hot blood and prescribed more dancing. The city council built stages and hired musicians. They turned a medical catastrophe into a public spectacle, and the spectacle made it worse. For 2 months, Strasbourg was a city at war with its own anatomy. This episode is about what happened in those 2 months. But more than that, it is about the years that came before them, because the dancing plague did not emerge from nothing. It was the end of a long sentence that began with famine, continued through plague, and ended with a population so broken that the body had to say what the mind no longer could. Today, we go to the Upper Rhine Valley. The year is 1518, and the ground is already shaking before anyone starts to move. To understand the dancing, you have to understand the hunger first. Strasbourg in 1518 was a free imperial city of the Holy Roman Empire, a status it had held since 1262. It meant self-governance, its own laws, its own taxes. The city was run by a council called the Magistrat, a blend of patrician families and powerful guild representatives. 20,000 to 30,000 people lived within its walls. The Rhine and the Ill rivers made it a crossroads for trade. The great cathedral spire, the tallest structure in the world when it was completed in 1439, marked the city from miles away. On paper, Strasbourg was prosperous, it was connected, it was important. But by 1518, the people inside the walls were dying. The harvests of 1516 and 1517 had failed completely across the Upper Rhine Valley. This was the Little Ice Age in miniature. Brutally cold winters gave way to late spring frosts that killed the seedlings in the ground, and then the summers turned scorching. The grain never came. Rye, the bread of the poor, became unaffordable. The price spiked to the highest levels anyone could remember. When there was no bread, people ate what they could find: tree bark, roots, animal feed, riverweed. The chronicles do not record exactly how many people starved in the Alsace region during those years, but the evidence of mass hunger is consistent across every source. Municipal aid to the poor, what little existed, was completely cut off. The traditional safety nets had been overwhelmed, and the hunger was only the first layer. I want you to understand the texture of this. A woman in the lower districts of Strasbourg in 1517 is eating bark. Not metaphorically, literally, stripping the inner bark from a tree, soaking it and chewing it because there is no grain, and there has been no grain for months. Her children, if she has them, are doing the same. The municipal aid that might have helped her has been cut off because the city's own resources are exhausted. She is watching her neighbors weaken and thin and, one by one, disappear from the streets. This is not distant history. This is a Tuesday. Smallpox was endemic. Syphilis, the Great Pox, a disease that had arrived in Europe barely 20 years earlier, was spreading through the region. It did not kill quickly. It disfigured. It rotted. It left people alive enough to suffer in the streets. The English sweat, a mysterious febrile illness that killed within hours, tore through northern Europe in 1517. The urban poor, crowded together in districts with no sanitation and no clean water, absorbed the worst of it. Then there was the spiritual dimension. And this may matter most of all. The population of Strasbourg was profoundly, daily, genuinely terrified of God. They lived in a world where famine and plague were not random misfortune. They were punishment, divine retribution for sin. Apocalyptic preachers warned of imminent judgment. Comets, floods, and extreme weather were read as signs. Martin Luther had posted his 95 Theses in Wittenberg just 1 year earlier, in 1517, and the entire religious order was fracturing. Clerical scandals, failing institutions, the sense that the structures meant to mediate between a person and their God were crumbling. So imagine the mind of a woman in Strasbourg in July of 1518. She is hungry, she may be sick, she is poor, and the institutions that were supposed to help her have failed. She believes with the certainty of a person who has never encountered an alternative explanation that God is angry, and that the suffering she sees around her is proof. She has no political recourse. She has no medical vocabulary for what she feels. She has only her body and the folklore her culture has given her, which includes a very specific belief that the saint called Vitus can curse the wicked with the compulsion to dance. That is the world the dancing plague walked into. Not a world of medieval simplicity, a world of compound, layered, escalating despair. A world where the pressure had been building for years, and there was no relief valve, and no one in authority who could explain why any of it was happening. And then a woman stepped into the street. Frau Trophäa started alone, but the contagion moved fast. Within days, other people in Strasbourg began to dance. The Imlin family chronicle, one of the most reliable primary sources, recorded that 34 people were afflicted within the first week. By the end of 4 weeks, the number had reached approximately 400, though historians debate the exact figure. Some sources say 50, some say hundreds. What is consistent across every account is that this was not a handful of isolated cases. It was a civic crisis. The dancers were not celebrating. The chronicles describe their movements as spasmodic, convulsive, anguished. They hopped from leg to leg, spun in circles, whooped and thrashed their arms. Their eyes were glassy and distant. Many of them screamed. Many begged for help, fully aware of what was happening to them, but entirely unable to stop it. Their feet swelled, then blistered, then bled. They danced until they collapsed from exhaustion, lay unconscious on the cobblestones until their bodies recovered a fraction of energy, and then rose and began again. To live in Strasbourg during those weeks was to inhabit a waking nightmare. The sound alone would have been unbearable. Hundreds of feet, many of them ruined and raw, slapping and scraping against the cobblestones in a rhythm that never stopped. Moaning, prayers muttered through cracked lips, the occasional scream. And underneath it all, the wet, percussive sound of open flesh on stone. The smell was worse. Hundreds of bodies sweating in the August heat, unwashed, some bleeding, some incontinent. The stench of suffering hung over the districts like weather. And the fear was worst of all, because the terror of the dancing plague was not just what it did. It was the possibility that it could happen to you. That your own legs might betray you, that you might walk into the market to buy bread, if there was bread, and your body might decide, without your permission, to join the dance. And people died. The official city council records do not tabulate the dead with precision, but later chronicle accounts are consistent. At the peak of the outbreak, as many as 15 people were dying in a single day. Strokes, heart attacks, total systemic exhaustion. The bodies of the dancers were consuming themselves, muscle fibers tearing apart and flooding the bloodstream with toxic proteins, kidneys failing under the load, hearts giving out under the strain of days of continuous movement in the July heat without adequate water or food. The city had become a place where you could watch your neighbors be killed by their own bodies. Slowly, in public, in the heat. And what made it worse, what transformed the crisis into something almost incomprehensible, was the city's own response. The Magistrat, the governing council of Strasbourg, did what institutions do when they face something they cannot explain. They asked the experts. The city's guild of physicians examined the dancers and delivered their diagnosis. They were operating under Galenic humoral theory, the dominant medical framework of the age. It held that the human body was governed by the balance of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was imbalance, and the physicians concluded that the dancer's blood had overheated, rushing to the brain and triggering the compulsive movement. The diagnosis was natural disease from hot blood. The prescribed cure followed logically from the diagnosis. If the blood was too hot, the patients needed to burn it off. They needed to dance more. They needed to dance it out. The city council took this advice and acted on it with the full force of municipal bureaucracy. Carpenters and tanners were ordered to convert their guild halls into temporary dance floors. Large wooden stages were constructed in the horse market and the grain market, the most visible public spaces in the city. And then the council hired musicians, professional pipers, drummers, fiddlers, horn players. They paid them from the city treasury. The disbursement records survive in the Strasbourg Municipal Archives. The city of Strasbourg paid with public money to provide a soundtrack for its own catastrophe. They even hired healthy dancers to join the afflicted on stage, to keep them moving, to encourage the cure. Think about that for a moment. Imagine standing in the Strasbourg grain market in August of 1518. On a wooden stage, dozens of people are dancing involuntarily. Their clothes are soaked in sweat. Their faces are pinched with hunger and anguish. Their feet are bleeding through their shoes. They are crying, some of them are screaming. And behind them, a row of hired musicians is playing as loudly as they can. And healthy citizens are dancing alongside the afflicted, as if enthusiasm might be contagious in the right direction. It was a catastrophic error. And the reason it was catastrophic has a name: rhythmic entrainment. The human motor system is wired to synchronize with external rhythms. It happens involuntarily. A steady drumbeat enters the ear, and the body wants to match it. For the dancers, who were already trapped in a dissociative trance state, the addition of relentless, driving percussion did not cure them. It deepened the trance. It locked them further into the movement. It provided a tempo for their suffering. And for the onlookers, the terrified citizens, already primed by years of famine and plague and spiritual anxiety, the stage spectacle did something even worse. It provided a demonstration. It showed them what the curse of Saint Vitus looked like. And under that kind of psychic pressure, seeing the thing you fear most can be enough to trigger it. The stages filled. The contagion accelerated. The city's cure was fuel. The council reversed course. It is unclear exactly when the realization arrived, but by late August, the physician's advice had been abandoned. The wooden stages were torn down. On August 28, 1518, the magistrate issued a series of ordinances that reversed everything. All public dancing and music were banned throughout the city. Gambling houses were shut. Brothels were closed. Sebastian Brandt, the Strasbourg chancellor and author of The Ship of Fools, recorded the sole exception. Families celebrating weddings or first masses could play stringed instruments, provided they solemnly swore not to use tambourines or drums. Percussion, the council had finally grasped, was the trigger. But the ban alone was not enough. The council needed a cure. And since medicine had failed spectacularly, they turned to theology. This is where the story of Saint Vitus enters. Vitus was a Christian martyr killed around 303 AD under Emperor Diocletian. In the folklore of the Rhine Valley, he held a specific and terrifying power. Local superstition, deeply held across Alsace, taught that Vitus could curse the wicked with compulsive dancing. The term Saint Vitus's dance had existed for centuries before 1518, applied to any affliction involving involuntary movement. And the theological logic was precise. The saint who could inflict the curse was also the only one who could lift it. The disease and the cure were two faces of the same divine power. The council loaded the worst afflicted dancers into wagons and carted them 30 miles to the shrine of Saint Vitus at Hohenstein, a chapel in the hills above the town of Saverne. There, in a grotto thick with incense and echoing with Latin incantations, priests performed a ritual that reads, across 5 centuries, like an act of psychological counter-programming. The dancers were placed beneath a wooden carving of Saint Vitus. Small crosses were pressed into their trembling hands. And then their ruined, bloodied feet were forced into red shoes. Red, the color of blood, of passion, of fire. Centuries later, Hans Christian Andersen would write a fairy tale called The Red Shoes, in which a girl is cursed to dance until her feet are amputated. The folklore runs deep. The priests sprinkled the red shoes with holy water and painted crosses on the soles and the tops with consecrated oil. Incense filled the grotto. Latin incantations echoed off the stone. The ritual was a binding, a termination point. For people trapped in a psychogenic trance shaped by the belief that a saint had cursed them, this was the closing of the loop. A highly structured sensory experience that met the affliction on its own terms. The curse had been acknowledged, the penance performed, the saint appeased. The psychological circuit that had been driving the involuntary movement now had a culturally sanctioned ending. Word traveled back to Strasbourg that Vitus had forgiven the sinners, and slowly, gradually, the dancing stopped. By September 1518, 2 months after Frau Trophea first stepped into the street, the plague was over. So what was actually happening to these people? They were not poisoned. For decades, the leading theory was ergotism, contamination from a fungus called Claviceps purpurea that grows on damp rye. Ergot contains alkaloids chemically related to LSD. It causes convulsions, hallucinations, and a burning sensation in the limbs. The wet harvests of 1516 and 1517 would have been ideal for ergot contamination. It sounds plausible until you think about it for more than a minute. The historian John Waller dismantled the ergot theory in a 2008 paper in The Lancet. Here is the problem. Ergot causes vasoconstriction. It starves the extremities of blood. That is why the gangrenous form of ergotism was called St. Anthony's fire, because your fingers and toes blackened and fell off. But sustained dancing, even involuntary dancing, requires massive blood flow to the legs. An ergot victim's limbs would be ischemic and dying. They could not dance for days. The mechanism contradicts itself. And the chronicles described no gangrene, no burning limbs, no lost extremities. Ergotism is the wrong answer. The right answer, or at least the most defensible one, is mass psychogenic illness, MPI. It is not a metaphor. It is not a polite way of saying they went crazy. MPI is a real, documented, recurring medical phenomenon, recognized in the epidemiological and psychiatric literature. Not mass hysteria, which is a dismissive term with a gendered history. MPI is a condition in which physical symptoms spread through a population via psychological and social mechanisms without any toxic or infectious agent. The mechanism works like this. When psychological suffering exceeds the threshold of what the conscious mind can process or articulate, the body converts that suffering into physical symptoms. This is called conversion disorder. The symptoms are real. The pain is real. The movement is real. But the cause is not a pathogen or a toxin. It is the mind, overwhelmed, handing the narrative to the body. The symptoms are not voluntary. The dancer is not choosing to move. But they are not unconscious either. The accounts from Strasbourg describe people who wept and pleaded while they danced. They knew what was happening. They could feel their feet bleeding. They were thirsty beyond description, and they could not stop. The will was simply overridden. The body had seized control of the narrative. And here is the critical piece. The form the symptoms take is shaped by culture. The sociologist Edward Shorter called this the symptom pool. People develop the symptoms their culture has taught them to expect. In 16th century Strasbourg, the symptom pool contained a very specific template, the belief that Saint Vitus could curse you with compulsive dancing. Under extreme psychosocial stress, the unconscious mind reached into that pool and pulled out the available template. The body screamed in the dialect it had been given. This is not a medieval curiosity. The mechanism is still active. This is not ancient history. It is not something the modern world has outgrown. In 1962, a laughter epidemic swept through a girls' school in Kashasha, Tanzania. It began with 3 students. Uncontrollable laughing, crying, and fainting spread to surrounding villages, affecting over 1,000 people and forcing 14 schools to close for months. No pathogen was ever found. In 2011, a cluster of teenage girls in Leroy, New York, developed sudden, involuntary tics, verbal outbursts, and speech difficulties. After months of investigation, the diagnosis was conversion disorder and MPI. And in 2020, during the pandemic, researchers documented a surge of adolescents developing Tourette's-like tics after watching TikTok videos of people with functional tics. Stress, plus a culturally available symptom template, this time delivered by algorithm, produced psychogenic symptoms in thousands of teenagers. The mechanism is the same across 5 centuries. Strasbourg, 1518. Tanzania, 1962. New York, 2011. TikTok, 2020. The body speaks when the mind cannot, and it speaks in whatever language the culture provides. The only thing that changes is the dialect. The dancing plagues of Europe disappeared after the early modern period, not because humanity became less susceptible to psychogenic illness, but because the cultural template changed. As the Protestant Reformation swept the Rhine Valley, the veneration of saints was dismantled. The cult of Vitus withered. And when the belief in the cursing saint evaporated, the body stopped expressing distress in that particular form. The symptom pool was drained. The dialect went extinct. But the body never stopped speaking. Here is what I keep coming back to. We know almost nothing about Frau Trophäa. We know she was poor. We know she was married. We know her husband begged her to stop, and she could not. We know she danced for 4 to 6 days before the city loaded her into a wagon and sent her to a shrine. We do not know if she survived. We do not know her age, her face, or what she dreamed about when her body finally let her sleep. She is a name in a chronicle, and barely that. But I think about her standing in that narrow street on a Sunday morning in July, the heat pressing down, the smell of the tanneries, the cathedral bell marking the hour, and something inside her, something she could not name and could not stop, forcing her body to move. She was not mad. She was not possessed. She was a woman who had been starving, who had watched her neighbors die of diseases that had no name she understood, who believed with absolute certainty that God was punishing her city, and who had run out of ways to say so. Her body found its own language, and when it spoke, 400 people understood it. The dancing plague of Strasbourg was not a medieval oddity. It was not a curiosity for a listicle or a strange but true segment. It was the sound of suffering that had exceeded the capacity of words. The dancers of 1518 were not spectacles. They were human beings whose pain had become so complete that it could only move through flesh. 400 people in a city of 20,000, starving, sick, terrified, and out of language. Their bodies found the only words left. The horror of this story is not the mystery of what caused it. The horror is the woman inside the dancing body, the one who could not stop. I'm A.M. Blackmere. Thank you for listening.